The story begins with a woman named Ruby, who wakes up every 3 a.m. to accompany her father Frank and her brother Leo to catch fish in the sea. They are a fisherman's family who have physical disabilities. They cannot hear voices except for Ruby. So Ruby is the only person who can hear in the family, while her father, mother, and older brother are all deaf. After helping her family catch fish, she then went to school. But of course, due to work fatigue, she often fell asleep in class. Ruby has a friend named Audra at school. Ruby finds it very difficult to make friends, and even her classmates often mock Ruby because she smells like fish. After school, Ruby is picked up by her parents, and often Ruby feels embarrassed because her deaf parents often come to pick her up with very loud music. The 3 of them then went to the dermatologist because Ruby's parents had skin problems. There, Ruby had to explain her parents' complaints to the doctor. Living in a deaf family certainly brings its own challenges for Ruby, especially when her family is too noisy in silence, like cleaning something too rough or putting things down too hard. But even so, Ruby loves her family very much. At school, Ruby tried to join the choir extracurricular, but during the placement test, all the members were asked to sing one by one. When it was Ruby's turn, their gazes seemed to belittle her, thus making Ruby insecure and run away from there. When in fact, Ruby's voice is very good. The proof is when alone by a lake, Ruby sings with a very good voice. One night, Ruby saw her parents talking in sign language. Ruby realized that her parents were experiencing economic difficulties. The fishing business they live on does not make much profit. Because of that, Ruby came to mind that her father was only an expert in that job and could not work in other fields. In addition, regulations for fishing in the city's waters have never been in favor of fishermen. The next day, Ruby tried to visit Mr. B again. Mr. B asked why Ruby ran away at that time. Ruby explained she was afraid of being ridiculed by her friends. Mr. B remembered that Ruby was a child with a deaf family. He said that Ruby did not need to worry about it. Mr. B said that there are many people who have beautiful voices, but not all of them are able to convey the meaning in the songs they sing. Since then, Ruby has returned to attending extracurricular activities, and because of Ruby's good voice, she is able to steal the attention of her friends, including Miles, the man that Ruby has liked for a long time. When class is over, Mr. B calls Ruby and Miles to tell them to be a duet couple at the fall concert. After school, Ruby followed her father and brother to a fish shop. Fortunately, Ruby's presence there was able to help her father from cheating collectors who like to buy their fish at low prices. Ruby, who could hear of course, told Leo about it. But Leo didn't like it when Ruby made him feel incapable of taking care of it. Actually, from the start, Ruby and Leo told their father to try selling their own fish. But their father was too afraid that their fish would not sell and they would not earn any money. The next day, when the choir class was over, Mr. B took Miles and Ruby to practice. At first, Mr. B thought that they had been training together, but because their performance was not good, they finally admitted that they were training in their respective places. Mr. B is angry because the duet couple should sing together, and he told them both to sing more harmoniously. After Miles comes home, Mr. B asks what Ruby's plans are when she graduates. Ruby said that she would probably work with her father since she didn't have the money to continue her studies. Mr. B says he trained Miles to put him in music college on a scholarship, and if Ruby will, Mr. B will help her fight. According to Mr. B, Ruby has a good voice, and he will offer his help to train Ruby directly. At home, Ruby told her mother that she was in the choir, but instead, her mother said, "If you were blind, would you paint?" Hearing that, Ruby was annoyed that not everything she did had to be related to her family. One day, Ruby invites Miles to practice at home. Ruby and Miles' arrival was, of course, unknown to Ruby's parents. They practice in Ruby's room to sing the song Mr. B asked. At first, they practice smoothly until finally, they accidentally hear the sound of Ruby's parents making love. Ruby, who was embarrassed by this, was forced to tell Miles to leave her house. Then, at school during lunch in the canteen, Ruby got ridicule from her friends. Ruby, of course, knew the meaning of their taunts and gestures, and annoyed, Ruby left from there. Miles, who saw that, chased after Ruby to apologize. He admitted that he only told one of his friends, and he had no idea that the story would spread. Maybe it's funny to them, but certainly not funny for Ruby. The lack of her parents was not something to be laughed at. In the afternoon, Ruby went to Mr. B's house for her first private practice. Initially, it was very difficult for Ruby to bring out the character of her good voice. But Mr. B always has a unique way of making Ruby enjoy his training methods, so that Ruby can bring out her abilities to the maximum. After returning from there, Ruby followed her father to a gathering place for fishermen with dock management. In the midst of talking about quota issues and so on, Frank tried to speak by being translated by Ruby. Frank's words were heard by the fishermen, and Frank revealed that he no longer wanted to sell his fish to collectors. He and Leo also invited other fishermen to jointly sell their own fish, and it was possible that their income would be doubled. Of course, Frank's words were just spontaneous because they got carried away. At home, they are worried and dizzy about how they can get the money to get started. Frank told his wife to do the books with the other fishermen's wives because that was the only way they could take it. After that, they started distributing leaflets to invite the fishermen to open a corporation together. Long story short, they even rented an empty kiosk to start their business. In the midst of busy helping her family, Ruby remains focused on her music lessons with Mr. B. Even though Ruby seems to come late every day, Ruby is indispensable for the survival of her family's company because she is the only person who can communicate with outsiders by phone. But over time, it finally made Mr. B annoyed, because he thought Ruby disrespected him and wasted his time. Ruby apologized and promised not to do it again. But one day, when Ruby tried to come on time, her mother actually forbade and begged Ruby not to go anywhere, because that afternoon they were going to be interviewed by the TV because of the breakthrough they made to help the fishermen. At first, Ruby was angry because she also had her own activity, but her mother kept begging because only Ruby could connect them during this interview. So Ruby was forced to finally not go and stay to help her family as translators. Because it was so late when Ruby came, Mr. B didn't even want to open the door to his house. So when at school, Ruby tried to apologize, but Mr. B said that Ruby wasn't ready for this. He even said that with such discipline, Ruby would not be able to live and compete on campus later. When at home, Ruby tries to talk to her family about her desire to study at a famous music college. She said that her teacher at school wanted to help her get a scholarship. But according to her parents, this is not the right time. They consider Ruby the most important part of the family business, but Ruby said she was tired, and there was no way she would be an interpreter for the rest of her life. Moreover, she would not stay with them forever. Ruby said she really likes singing, and this is a great opportunity for her. The next day, because she was upset with her parents, Ruby decided not to go fishing, so only Leo and Frank worked. Unfortunately, that day an observer assigned by the government came to their ship. Of course, without Ruby, they would be speechless. This observer's job is to monitor whether they carry out regulations properly or not. When they can't answer the observer's question, Frank wrote something to tell them they were deaf, because she just realized that Frank and Leo are deaf. The observer immediately contacted the Coast Guard. Long story short, the Coast Guard contacted them via radio. But of course, they couldn't hear the call. And because of that, they were stopped and banned. On the other hand, Ruby went with Miles. Miles tries to apologize to Ruby for his earlier mistake. After Ruby forgives Miles, they spend time swimming in the lake. After returning home, Ruby realized that her family was facing a new problem. Frank's sailing license was suspended, and he couldn't fish for a while. Her father and mother blamed Ruby for the incident, but Leo tries to defend Ruby by saying that they should have a crew that can hear, because Ruby can't always accompany them. A few days later, they were finally brought to trial. In addition to having to pay a fine of $2,000 for sailing in a dangerous way, they also have to provide a crew who can hear to answer radio calls and so on. Actually, finding someone who can hear is very easy, but the problem is who has sign language skills like Ruby. That night, hearing that Frank was going to sell his boat, Ruby decided that she would put off her dream of going to college to help out with the family business. Leo was against the decision, but Ruby was confident in her decision. Leo was angry with his sister's decision and left the dining table. The next day, Ruby tried to talk to Leo, but Leo was still angry at Ruby. What Leo said actually made a lot of sense, because Ruby can't stay with her family forever. Leo heard from his friend that Ruby can really sing, and Leo wants Ruby to keep pursuing her dream. Leo said he could take care of all this because he was a big brother. The proof is that our family was fine before you were born, Leo said. He just didn't want to be thought of as a pitiful person because of his flaws. Long story short, the high school choir's annual fall concert begins. Ruby's family is also there, although they realize that they can only see when the choir team sings. Frank and his wife, Jackie, can only talk about how beautiful their daughter is on stage. They also clap their hands when others do. When it comes to the session, Ruby and Miles sing a duet on stage. Frank can't hear how good Ruby's voice is. All he can do is look at the expressions of the other people watching their princess. There are expressions of amazement and admiration, and some even burst into tears when they see Ruby's performance. It's at this moment that Frank and Jackie finally discover that Ruby can really sing. After that, Mr. B tries to get acquainted with Frank and Jackie. He tells them that Ruby has a really good voice, and they regret not letting her go to college. However, Ruby seems to only translate the first sentence. Arriving home, Ruby accompanies Frank outside. Frank asks Ruby to tell him about the song she sang on stage earlier. Ruby explains that the song is about what it means to need other people. Frank asks Ruby to sing for him and holds Ruby's neck to try to listen through the vibrations of the sound. Immediately, Frank is deeply moved to hear his daughter sing. The next morning, Frank surprises everyone by deciding to take Ruby to audition for college. It's a sudden decision, but they believe that Ruby deserves this opportunity. When they arrive, it appears that Miles has finished his audition. But unfortunately, he thinks he made a mistake and might fail. It's then Ruby's turn to sing. Mr. B accompanies her with the sound of the piano. Ruby sings a song they had rehearsed for months, and her performance is special. She even explains the lyrics to her family, who are in the stands, and it impresses the examiners. While waiting for the results of the campus selection, Ruby continues to accompany her family in fishing and managing the company. Family members have started trying to be independent without Ruby. Finally, the day of the announcement arrives, and Ruby is accepted into the campus. Mr. B is proud of Ruby's achievements and never thought their efforts would be successful. In a short time, the day comes when Ruby has to go to Boston for college. Frank, Jackie, and Leo have to let Ruby go to pursue her dreams, despite the shortcomings of the Ruby family. In fact, no family is perfect. They will always argue or fight, and they often don't even talk to each other. But in the end, family is still family, where love will always be. This will be the end of today's dose of movie. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help us make more content daily. Thank you again, and see you on the next video.